Good afternoon. I hope everyone can hear me, even though I'm 4,000 miles away. It's a very considerable pleasure to have this opportunity to speak to you, both those in person in Scranton and those on Zoom also. Before I go any further, in relation to Bodhi's advert, I should say that all proceeds from the sale of the book are going to the museum. So by now, to avoid disappointment when they're gone, they're gone. I'd also like to add my considerable thanks to Bodhi for masterminding the operation to get this exhibition to go live on your side of the water, to John Fielding, who had the difficult task of distributing all the exhibition panels to the different sites. And my thanks also to all those who I haven't necessarily met at the Historical Museum Commission, but who I know have contributed in major ways to enabling this exhibition to go forward. So I want to do just a few things this afternoon to give you a flavour of the exhibition and its different components, but also a bit more than that, as I'll start to indicate now. That really the rationale for the exhibition is rather wider than just, simply showing photographs. Because in the period between 1840 and 1920, as you can see, the economy of the United States experienced pretty well explosive growth, although in different phases, both in mining, manufacturing, railroads, and so on. And developments in the state of Pennsylvania played a major role in all of these, and I'll try and highlight that within the national context as we go through. Much of the process of development began in the east of Pennsylvania. Any colleagues from Pittsburgh will immediately be protesting, but Pittsburgh apart, the two halves of the state in economic terms were somewhat distinct until the Pennsylvania Railroad finally joined them together, I believe, on the 10th of December, 1852. So we've got a large area. I've been traveling to Pennsylvania for almost 50 years now. And I feel I know the state as almost as well as some of the locals. But what I'm trying to do in the exhibition is find some ways of tracking and visualizing economic development over time and space. But given we've also got a number of interacting and interlinked economic sectors, this is really quite challenging to do. And some years ago, prompted originally, I have to say, by the late attorney F. Charles Petrillo, that some of you know, or some of you knew, he originally set me on the path that has led to what we're looking at today. He spotted the potential for stereo photography, stereo views, for showing and illustrating aspects of industrial development in the 19th century. Now, there's all sorts of issues about the use of stereo views. We don't have time to get into them all by any means today. But there's one thing that is crucially important, is that the stereo view development or surge, whatever you want to call it, that began in the middle of the 19th century was fed by a very large number of photographers acting largely independently to chart what was going on around them. Rapid landscape change, new industries springing up, new railroad branches being constructed, and that provided them with an almost limitless supply, as I say, of new photographic subjects. So it's not simply a photographic exhibition, but I'm trying to show how images derived from the stereo view record can enhance our understanding of the evolving geography of industrial development. The original exhibition at the Royal Geographical Society in London, a very large venue, in fact, just up from the Victoria and Albert Museum, if you know central London. And because of its size, Historical and Museum Commission have decided to separate out the different thematic groups of panels which focus on different economic sectors. So the different museums that Bodhi's mentioned have a focus in their own particular areas. Now, within the exhibition panels, and there's of different sizes, 50 or 60 of them altogether across the different museums, I make use both of mono images, in other words, one side of the stereo view, when we're interested in the content of the photograph, but also I've tried to provide what are called anaglyphs, actually an 1890s technology that allowed light to be split into different color components, and then one set of colors loaded onto one half of the stereo view, another set onto the other. And then when these are combined, of course, we do it digitally now, and you look at them through red-blue tinted glasses, you get a surprisingly helpful pseudo 3D effect. And in some cases, it's quite startling. And obviously what I have done is try to create large format versions of these, which was no mean feat, because the panels you'll look at, which have anaglyphs printed on them, are 16 times larger than the originals. And they had to be very carefully conserved, shall we say, to remove the blemishes, which if you increase the blemishes 16-fold, the resulting image doesn't look very nice. So many of them have been edited down to the pixel level to ensure a good viewing experience, and I hope you will find that to be the case. In London, almost to my surprise, about 96% of people, regardless of how good their stereo vision actually is or was, 96% of people were able to see the stereo effects on the anaglyphs done in the way that we have in this exhibition, which is excellent in terms of accessibility. So we've got different thematic groups at the different museums, and they are, as you can see here, anthracite coal mining, iron and steel, oil, and railroads. But I've also taken the opportunity, on behalf, if you like, of the photographic history community, to pay homage, if you like, to a couple of extremely important stereo view series that captured a couple of key events or happenings in 19th century Pennsylvania history. One of these is really well known. At the London exhibition, I was amused to have an American Airlines pilot from Dallas, Texas, demonstrate his remarkable knowledge of the Johnstown flood in 1889. But equally interestingly, almost no one in London had encountered the 1877 Railroad War in Pittsburgh, despite the firestorm that essentially destroyed the Pennsylvania railroad yards for a very long distance in the centre of the city, as some of you will know. I should also add that almost half of the visitors at the London exhibition were in fact from the United States. So in fact, we had people from 21 countries. So it got a very interesting spread of reactions, but I'm pleased to say they were very positive. So what am I trying to do in this presentation in particular? To provide some more historical and geographical context for these industrial sectors. So we've got a lightning run through aspects of US industrial history to start us off. But then hopefully you'll see why I've done that when we come to the second half, when we talk more about stereo coverage and why it's uneven in different parts of the state and elsewhere. To say a little bit more about the development of stereo photography, though this is not a talk about the history of stereo photography per se. And also then to show some examples of rarely or very rarely seen views to give you a taster for what's actually on the panels at the different museum sites. I'm not going to provide any anaglyphs because online viewers and so on won't have the glasses to hand and so on. You need actually to go to the site to experience the anaglyphs themselves. None of the images I'm going to show actually appear in the exhibition itself. So these are just to show there's plenty more beyond what I could fit onto the exhibition panels, even though there's about 175 different images in the exhibition itself. In fact, one of the largest stereo exhibitions that's ever been mounted, as far as I can tell. So that's quite encouraging. So here we go into a quick look at some of these sectors, and where better to start with a map of the state from the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Now, everyone in the auditorium is entirely familiar with the anthracite coalfields in eastern Pennsylvania. I'll show a couple of maps of the northern field in a moment. But not everyone is so familiar with the enormous extent of the soft coal, bituminous coal field in western Pennsylvania, some 12,000 square miles of it, and extending, of course, into southeastern Ohio, West Virginia, and so on. So that's where we are. And for each of the four sectors I'm going to very briefly talk about, I just tried to go through the different manufacturing censuses to just pull out a few figures to give you a taste of what was going on. Now there's varying amounts of inflation adjustment between the decades. There's various ways in which the measurements were taken. So these are just very broadly indicative figures. But we can see in the anthracite, the number of establishments is pretty steadily rising, and employment very markedly rising between 1860 and 1880. The amount invested, tricky sum to deal with. That's a rather specific census definition. So undeveloped coal lands are not included in that. So actually the amount in the mines themselves is probably between 50 and 60 million dollars in 1880. So a relatively small number of establishments, not trivial by any means, but quite heavily capitalized. If we look at the bituminous coal fields, now remember these are national figures, but of course almost all the anthracite, bar a couple of mines in New England, almost all the anthracite as we know is in Pennsylvania. With bituminous, there's a different story. Only about 20% by 1880, certainly, of the overall number of bituminous coal mines are in Pennsylvania. Because Ohio has a big contribution, so does Illinois by the later date, and so on. So there are more than 10 times as many establishments in soft coal as there are in anthracite. The overall employment has passed anthracite as shipments did during the 1870s. But because only 20% of these people are actually in Pennsylvania, anthracite is still king in Pennsylvania in 1880. And crucially, if you look at the capital, if your mental arithmetic's good, the capital in relation to the number of establishments, each establishment is much smaller in investment terms in the soft coal regions than it is in anthracite. And that is of significance to us. So that's the kind of temporal picture. Just a couple of my old graphs from the heavily discounted book. Here's the northern anthracite coalfield that many are familiar with in 1865. Notice how the mines are concentrated around the urban areas. If we fast forward to 1885, we see that not only is there an expansion of mines over time, but the geographical area where mines are found has been infilled significantly between the major settlements. So there's a lot of things all going on at once. And there's other things to add to that I'll hopefully come to in a moment or two. So a few thoughts there on anthracite in particular. The mines are large. There's not an enormous number of them, but they are very heavily capitalized. Right, without further ado, switching suddenly to a place that again many will recognize, and darting back a century to 1742, I believe, when the Cornwall Charcoal Iron Furnace was first established. So if we switch from mining to iron and steel, we find a somewhat different picture, and one with an equally or indeed even more complex temporal and geographical distribution. Here's a graph you probably won't have seen before. This is charcoal-fired and anthracite-fired blast furnaces in Pennsylvania based on the dates of construction. Obviously, the Cornwall Iron Furnace is way back here in 1742, but leaving that aside, we notice in terms of charcoal, which is these shaded lines, that there are some well-defined booms and slumps in construction, often associated with the aftermath of the 1837 banking panic, the 1857 banking panic, which pretty well finished off major developments in charcoal iron, not the industry in total, but new developments in it. And we see a more muted version of that in terms of anthracite furnaces. And the anthracite furnaces, unlike charcoal, continued being built into the 1860s and 70s and so on. A rather busy map based on work that I did with my colleague Anne Knowles, who's just retired from the University of Maine. But it's a helpful little summary map. If you don't have to see all the details, just a couple of points. One is the dark blue circles are rolling mills. heavily concentrated at that time in the Schuylkill Valley and starting to become a force in the Lehigh Valley, with more to come. And there's a lot on that in the exhibition itself. Charcoal furnaces, the triangles, the black ones are furnaces still in operation. The white ones, particularly up here, down here to some extent, are furnaces that are abandoned. So it's not just a matter of charcoal furnaces being built, they're also being abandoned at a much higher rate than, for instance, anthracite furnaces. Many of these furnaces here are tributary to Pittsburgh, coming down the Allegheny River and so on, sending the pig iron down to the foundries and so on of Pittsburgh, with the Main Line Canal and the Pennsylvania Railroad cutting across to from the Susquehanna to join to Pittsburgh. So a lot of busyness by 1860 in the different iron districts. Anthracite is coming to the fore. Charcoal is on the wane, and the dates when that happened are important in relation to stereo view coverage. Another quick map of another way of putting it, in a sense. Again, a map from Ann Knowles that we used in our 2006 paper. Oops, sorry. That shows the areas, both in Pennsylvania and indeed more widely, where different types of blast furnace fuel are being used. So east of the Susquehanna, anthracite is ruling the roost, both because there are mines in the immediate vicinity and because people can get anthracite via the Delaware and Hudson Canal and the Pennsylvania Coal Company's Railroad, and then into the Delaware Hudson Canal, up to the Hudson River, almost as far as parts of Vermont and so on. There's also a kind of localized area where furnaces are using what we might call locally grown coke. This is before the days of the major development in the Colesville coke region, which really comes after the beginning of the 1870s. And then you have an unusual thing, the Mercer and Lawrence County block coal furnaces that developed after 1845, and some of those overlapped into the Hanging Rock district of Ohio, where there are also numerous charcoal furnaces. So here's still a lot of charcoal furnaces, haven't quite, these are the ones that haven't been abandoned so far, and so on and so forth. So charcoal spread over a very wide area, but very small furnaces producing on average about 600 tons a year each. The anthracite furnaces by this period cranking up to anything as big as 5,000 tons of pig iron per furnace. So this is what we're looking at, rapid change all through the period. So again, another of my tables with far too many numbers to absorb, but the pig iron industry, blast furnaces, increasing right through the period, as is capitalization, as is employment. Rolling mills and similar, actually the number in operation is declining, but they're much more heavily capitalized, so they're getting bigger and their employment is very substantial. This, of course, is right across the United States. Steel, unimportant in 1860, very niche activity. But by 1880, thanks to Sir Henry Bessemer and Mr. Kelly, the Kentucky ironmaster, who eventually shared the Bessemer patent, we have a growing number of Bessemer furnaces, as well as a number of specialist steel, crucible steel makers still extant, but their employment is much lower. So again, constant change and development in the industry at that time. And thanks to a gentleman who we'll encounter further in a few minutes, John Mather, the oil regions photographer, an Englishman by birth, I have to say, his wondrous, almost panorama shot of the Brady's Bend ironworks, by then a coke-fired iron and steel works, from 1873, and a nice little link there to our next thematic grouping, which is the oil industry. And here is Brady's Bend, where the photo was taken. This is northeastern Pennsylvania, northwestern Pennsylvania. I'm not doing very well with the compass points today. Northwestern Pennsylvania, Venango Forest, Warren County, and so on. This is Oil Creek, the start of the oil industry, as everyone knows, in 1859. And for a number of years during the 1860s, this was the main locus of the world oil industry in commercial terms. Other places in Russia and so on came on later. But to begin with, of course, there were no railroads at all, and that's why some of the railroad dates are numbered here. Oil Creek Railroad reaching Corrie, 1862, the Atlantic and Great Western Railroad arriving at that point in Oil City in 1865, and so on. Before the railroad was built, as some of you know, the road from Titusville to Corrie was an endless traffic jam of wagons holding barrels of oil, trying to get it to the railhead at Corrie. In fact, it was nearly as bad as Interstate 81 on a normal working day, as I'm sure Chester Kalesa, who's in the audience, will remember from a trip we once made many years ago. Up here to the east in McKean County, and the map didn't go quite as far as it should, is the Bradford Oil District that developed in the 1870s. So 1860s in the Oil Creek region, 1870s up in Bradford. But all the railroads fighting to get, this is the Philadelphia and Erie Railroad, became part of the Pennsylvania Railroad essentially, all fighting to get the crucial oil traffic both during the Civil War and after. Oops, sorry, I keep pressing the wrong button. There we go. Now here's a graph to enliven the interest, hopefully, of certainly colleagues at Drake Well. And you may wonder where this oil company incorporation's graph has come from. This is the tail end of the Civil War, 1864 into 1866. And what you're looking at is details of incorporations from a wide range of records, including the entirety of the incorporation records pertaining to oil companies held in the state archives. And my thanks to colleagues there who many years ago helped me with the processing of these. And what it shows is April 1865, a certain Robert E. Lee surrendered, of course, at Appomattox Courtyard. But as he was surrendering, what can only describe as corporation mills turning out new companies from offices in Philadelphia reach an all-time high. This was big-time speculation. At one point, it was claimed that as much money was going into oil speculation as was being used to fuel or to support the Union Army during the Civil War. Whether that's apocryphal, I'm not quite sure, but huge amounts of money went into oil speculation during this period, the first major Pennsylvania oil boom. But only by looking at the incorporation records can you see just how large it was. So we've got an oil boom in the Oil Creek area, and a decade later, we got a similar boom, not with so many companies, but certainly with a lot more wells in the Bradford district. So here we go. 1860 is a bit early, as Colonel Edwin Drake has only managed to sink a few wells by the start of 1860, and others in his vicinity. But by 1880, we have 14,000 wells. Pennsylvania has almost all of them, and half of them by 1880 are in the Bradford district. This seems to me, or both these figures, really rather low compared to information from the incorporation records and so on, and may reflect only the actual investment in the wells themselves rather than the very expensive oil lands changing hands very, very rapidly. But employment is not enormous compared to the mining and the iron and steel industries. I forgot to mention, in terms of the iron and steel statistics, that of those numbers, about 46% of the entire national totals were in Pennsylvania. So Pennsylvania has the whole of the anthracite. It has 20% of the bituminous, 46% of all the iron and steel activity, taken as a very rough average. And in oil drilling, 96%. In refining, slightly more tricky issue because of progressive competition from a certain John D. Rockefeller and his desire to focus on particularly Cleveland to some extent at the expense of Pittsburgh and other refineries in that area, a point that's picked up on one of the exhibition panels. So a positive cavalcade there of statistical information, but it just shows what a key role the Keystone State actually played in industrial development during that period. But we mustn't forget, of course, the railroads, which had their own booms and busts, as many of you know as well as I do. But particularly we see the effect. There's the 1857 panic, sudden collapse, Civil War, not much going on, run up before the 1873 panic, collapse during the 1870s depression, boom during the 1880s, collapse down to May 1885 at the bottom of the recession there, but picked up again in the late 1880s. In Pennsylvania, somewhat different picture, not quite as long a time period being shown, but the Civil War didn't have quite such an adverse effect as in the nation as a whole. We get the run-up in mileage after the Civil War. We do get the Depression during the 70s. Well, that's the 1870s depression there, but a little bit of a hold up in 1869 to 71, and a significant peak just before the 1873 banking panic. Another bit of a run up in the 1880s, just as the national figures also show. And very quickly, as time's against us, one of my old little cartoons of the anthracite railroads centered on, of course, Scranton being the center of the world, and the major anthracite railroads. And what's interesting about this little graph from map from 1900 is how the railroads, if you like, segmented the geography. So the Delaware and Hudson, I'll take the high road to on the New York and Canada Railroad going up there. Thank you very much. Um, Pennsylvania Railroad, well, got a finger in every pie, including the western edge of the anthracite fields, as many of you know. We've got the Reading Railroad in its Schuylkill Valley haven there, and the southern and western middle coalfields. And then we've got the Erie and the Lackawanna and belatedly the Lehigh Valley, desperate to get to Buffalo to get the coal across the Great Lakes to Chicago. But this is a big time operation. And just if we have any welcome colleagues from the western states, I don't think Wisconsin quite counts if Bob Walensky's on, but quite often, as you read about the US railroads in the 19th century, we get a significant focus on the western states. Um, Entirely appropriate in terms of the Transcontinental Railroad, completed in 1869, but as late as 1880, if you look at where the concentration of definitely identified railroad men, the red segments, and those possibly connected to railroads, the blacksmiths, the machinists, the carpenters, and so on, you see that the American manufacturing belt is already pretty well established by the beginning of the 1880s. Don't worry about the positions of these symbols is controlled by the mapping display rather than a tight focus on geography. But the point is there. The real locus of railroad activity, despite the Transcontinental Railroad, sorry, Utah, is still very much in the east. And here the standard statistics that the mileage is reasonably reliable. The employment is unreliable. And yeah, oh, I hope you can hear me. I'm getting um the try and get rid of that. Oh dear. uh, Go back to where we were. Yeah. So 750,000 people on the census date, but during the year, you may get another 500,000 people in different aspects of railroad employment for temporary periods and so on. So huge numbers of people had some connection to the railroad industry. So, lightning run through. And we're coming to the end of the numbers and we're heading towards the photographs, you'll be pleased to hear. Just a bit of a switch now to the stereo view record and what it tells us. Well, I think most people are familiar with the concept of the stereo view, where you capture two offset images in your camera, you mount them on a card, and you look at them through a viewer, and you get a greater or lesser degree of three-dimensional effect. Obviously, the anaglyphs in the exhibition have been very carefully tweaked to optimize the 3D effect in a way you can't do it in a handheld viewer. But notice stereo photography wasn't invented till 1850 and didn't reach the US till 1854. Note the name Frederick Langenheim. You'll come back to him both today and in the exhibition itself. But crucially, by 1859, a low-cost handheld viewer had been developed, which opened up the possibility of a mass market. And Mr. Anthony in New York was not slow to take advantage of it, as you can see by 1862, churning them out. Some of them still in good shape to this day, and many of very good quality. And this is where the timing, and why I spent a good deal of time talking about the timing of industrial developments, because it just so happened that stereo photography technology had its great flowering, as you can see, in the period, in a sense, partly during the Civil War, but certainly in the period thereafter, and extending in our area into the 1880s. So stereo views were becoming very popular, and the large number of people were involved in making them. And by the 1880s, they were being mass produced. There's even stereo views showing railroad cars full of stereo views being sent to market. It had got to that stage by the turn of the century. So look at the numbers here as to just how many views it's thought may have been produced. And every photographer worth his salt in every town and city has got a sideline in creating stereo views. They're recording their changes in their local area, their local landscapes, new developments of an industrial kind. And so it was an extraordinary kind of a proto-crowdsourcing of historical landscape change, you might say. But because of the number of these images, and in general, until quite recently, they haven't been very much curated by museums who are more interested in the very high quality, large format images for obvious reasons. And so they haven't been studied as much as I think they merit. And part of that reason is because of the timing of the flowering of stereo view production, which matched the timing of rapid industrialization. So we've got a free history done for us by a large number of willing photographers. And there's lots of ways that people study stereo views or indeed collect them. Some by photographer, some geographical interest. There's, of course, the Civil War, don't even go there. Very interesting in its own right. We must give an honourable mention to Messrs. Hart, Russell, and Carlton Watkins, those who chartered the building and completion of the Union Pacific Railroad. But they are by no means the only people involved in railroad stereo view production. Then we have specialist people interested in specialist topics. One of my favourites is the second John Wesley Powell expedition to Colorado in the 1870s. John Wesley Powell, second director of the United States Geological Survey, who lost an arm at the Battle of Shiloh in 1862. Then lots of attention to specific events. We'd have been pretty lost without the stereo photographers. At the 1876 centennial, we're up to 250 now, but the 1876 centennial was a big thing. The 1877 Railroad War we talked about. People were on hand, almost ambulance chasing. Same with the Johnstown flood. A flood of photographers pouring into the area because of the scale of the devastation. And we've got some good examples of that in the exhibition and so on. Other important things like photos taken before and after the Great Fire of Chicago. So all human life is there. But we have a particular interest in the industrial scenes. Now, we could argue at great length about how many X's should be in which boxes, but we've got a couple of really positive periods with a big signal, anthracite, end of the 1860s through to the early part of the 1880s. Great flowering there of coal breaker photography, if you like. An extraordinary dearth on the bituminous side, Remember, these are much smaller concerns, hidden in back valleys in the bituminous regions. Um, uh, Iron, a steady stream, but not as many actually as we have of things like anthracite breakers. Railroads, again, a steady stream. This is in the east of the state. If we look at the west, we get a different picture with the coming of H.C. White, the Keystone Company of Meadville, Pennsylvania. Very important sets of stereo views in the 1890s. Oil, 1860s and 1870s. John Mather, Mr. Robbins, Weston Waddell, these people all involved in that process. And the railroads, we'll say more about them in just a moment. But there's one thing I want to draw your attention to with this little hieroglyph at the bottom. In the early period, especially the 1860s and 1870s, a large number of the views, especially of the oil and the anthracite industries, tell you exactly which mine or which oil well, on which oil farm, or in which town perhaps the mines or wells are located. Though it's a generalization, as we move towards the 1890s and the industrial producers like the Keystone Stereo View Company, we find much more of a focus on industrial processes and much less of a focus on place. For someone who's a historical geographer like myself, knowing where things happened as well as when they happened is of considerable significance in terms of landscape reconstruction and so on. So, what's it all about? Oh, where did that one come from? An interloper that shouldn't be there. You instantly recognise as the film set for the Molly Maguires in Eckley, Pennsylvania, but taken in 1979. Unfortunately, I didn't have a stereo camera about my person at the time. Now, I know the breaker at Eckley, if it's still standing, has seen better days now, but I just thought I'd pop that in for old time's sake. I'm now so old that I'm almost my own historical geography, I have to say. Say 1979, that photo was taken. But what you're really interested in seeing is, of course, the number 2 slope breaker at Eckley, Pennsylvania, by John Brown from around 1870. It took me 20 years to find a copy of this stereo view, not least because one of my first ever papers more than 40 years ago was on Sharp, Weiss and Company and the Lehigh Coal Trade of Pennsylvania, which is all about the output of the breakers in Eckley, Pennsylvania. So I thought you'd like to see that little number. And just a couple of others that some of which have turned up recently. Here's the ill-fated Pottsville twin shafts by hard-working Amos Allen of Pottsville. Very expensive, very deep shafts that produced very little coal and were eventually abandoned. But that's a story for another day. The Wanami number 18 breaker. Why am I showing this? Because it's believed to be the only surviving copy of that particular breaker photo. Indeed, the only surviving photo of that breaker at that period in time. One of the things I could talk at great length about, but don't have time to, is that anthracite coal breakers frequently burned down, frequently were remodeled, rebuilt, moved to new sites, and so on. So knowing where the photo was taken and what it was taken of and when it was taken are very important to understanding just how much capital is needing to be reinvested in this industry to keep the mines open. But if we go on to, here's the Keystone View Company, the 1890s or even 1900s, thereabouts. Very high quality photo, but okay, we know it's an anthracite breaker, but we've got a fair bit here about the process of what's going on. But we only know it's in Pennsylvania, but we knew that to start with. So it's not actually telling us about place now. It's just telling us, importantly, but about process rather than location and geography. Moving gently on, it is thought that this also was the only surviving copy of the stereo view of this furnace, the Shawnee furnace in Columbia, Pennsylvania. Unfortunately, it's also now believed that that stereo view has been lost. Fortunately, I was able to get a copy of it before that happened. So this became the Chestnut Hill ore mines furnace, or some version of that title. It was renamed at a later date. But a substantial operation, 1868, near the banks of the Susquehanna there in central Pennsylvania, an anthracite furnace. Very rare picture indeed. Okay, that's an anthracite furnace. But here's, again, like with the breakers, we can leap forward to 1907 to H.C. White, and both White and Keystone produced large numbers of interior atmospheric kind of process for, stereo views. Here's one rolling a slab of molten iron going through the rolls here. And there's numerous stereo views of this. Okay, they're almost all from the Homestead Works in Pennsylvania. But do we have stereo views of the early coke-fired furnaces in Pittsburgh, the Clinton from 1860 and so on? I've never seen one in 20 years of looking. The coke furnaces, the early ones, like the bituminous mines, there's a great gap for some reason in the coverage as compared to the anthracite or even the eastern anthracite furnaces. But there are one or two bright spots. Here's a coke Larry charging a coke furnace, probably in the Connellsville area. But again, we see the process rather adequately there with a wonderful little engine on top of the coke ovens. But we don't know exactly where it is because they're not telling us. So process rather than place. And if we have some folks coming in from the Railroad Museum, this is what they've been patiently waiting for, as I'm running out of time, but also getting towards the end here now. The names will be familiar to folks who are interested in railroad photography. And kind of going through over a period of time, we start with the Langenheim brothers, who brought the stereo view to the United States. And what was the first thing they did? They took a trip on the Philadelphia and Reading Railroad in 1854 to 5. I'm going to show you one of their views in just a moment, and there's another in the exhibition. Around 1868, there's a remarkable anonymous series of views called Views on the Line of the Philadelphia and Reading Railroad and Branches, which contains a wealth of place-based information about early coal breakers, bridges, tunnels, you name it, is in this series. But we don't know what they all are. I'm working on it as fast as I can, but they only come up very rarely to be acquired. William Purviance in 1867, official photographer of the Pennsylvania Railroad, and then later went on to produce a very extended series of, I have to say, moderate quality stereo views. They haven't lasted the test of time quite as well as many others, but still a remarkable record along the Pennsylvania Railroad. And there's one or two intriguing ones on the exhibition panels that those interested in the Pennsylvania Railroad will want to look at. In the 1870s, Frederick Gutekunst, a Philadelphia photographer, very high quality, very technically skilled individual, a wonderful set of 250 odd views of the Pennsylvania Railroad. Half of them are in an online exhibit at the Library Company of Philadelphia, as some of you will know. But several of the rarest that are not at the Library Company of Philadelphia are in the exhibition here. And also R.A. Bonine or Bonine, I don't know how to pronounce it, and not to be confused with R.K. Bonine, who came on later with the Johnstown flood. He was very active around Altoona in the 1870s. Again, high quality views. So let's have a quick run through some of these. Here is one of that first set of Langenheim stereo views, courtesy of the New York Public Library. Why on earth has he taken a photograph of the hotel in Mount Carbon, Pennsylvania? To which all the Anthracite railroaders immediately reply, because it was the original terminus of the Philadelphia and Reading Railroad. So the railroads and the stereo photographers have got an intimate connection almost from the start. Here's a couple of views you almost certainly won't have seen before from the Philadelphia and Reading Railroad series in 1868. The coal elevating apparatus at the Port Richmond coal docks, a bridge on the Schuylkill and Susquehanna Railroad above Pine Grove. These are places that don't really get much in the way of photographic coverage, but they're in this series, places no longer forgotten. And a very recent addition to the archive, if I can put it like that, a long view of basically a switchyard and tracks at Cressona, the West Branch crossing of the Mine Hill Railroad, which of course by this time has become essentially a component of the Philadelphia and Reading Railroad, with its tracks going into the southern and western middle coalfield. But here's where you can benefit from other people's collections. Again, the New York Public Library. Here is the 180-degree roundhouse of the Philadelphia and Reading Railroad, also at Cressona. So suddenly a place that nobody's heard of, that we didn't know anything about, we see there's considerable industrial activity. And the colleagues from Western Pennsylvania getting slightly irritated now. Why are we spending so much time on this these unimportant railroads in unimportant places? Well, what we have to remember, of course, is that in 1871, the Philadelphia and Reading Railroad, raising the anthracite flag, was the largest corporation in the entire world. And it was not overtaken by the Pennsylvania Railroad until 1875. And talking of the Pennsylvania Railroad, here is the Purviance, one of his many, many views. There's hundreds of them, all along the tracks of the Pennsylvania Railroad. Is at Blairsville, I think, in Indiana County. Locals will correct me if I've got that one wrong. But interesting trackside scenes and so on of all kinds. Here's shows you see the comparative quality of Mr. Gutekunst. one of his rather nice offerings of a small place called Allegrippus near the western end of Horseshoe Curve on the Pennsylvania Railroad, that fabulous location which appears in the exhibition. And not forgetting Mr. Bonin, here's the Pennsylvania Railroad Yards in Altoona. Here's, I think, one of the roundhouses here. And here are the car repair shops of the Pennsylvania Railroad. So in just the scale of these operations as early as the mid-1870s. And not to be forgotten, and I say just got a very small number of slides to go. I couldn't help but include this for the lovers of the inclined planes and gravity railroads. Again, looks as though it was taken last week almost, this photograph from around 1865 on the middle of the Ashley Plains near Wilkes-Barre, which operated till 1948. But what's also interesting is who took it. Now, I'm happy to be corrected if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty certain that is the same S.B. Whiting who in later years became the general manager of the Coal and Iron, the Philadelphia and Reading Coal and Iron Company, and probably most famous or infamous for his testimony before the government investigation into labour troubles in the anthracite regions in 1887 to 1888. A must read for all anthracite enthusiasts, a thick volume. Mine's on my bookshelf. I'm sure Bodie keeps his by his bedside for a ready reference. But interesting that a relatively young train spotter, as we would call him, or gravity plane spotter, is out with his camera doing good work. And another stunning view by Mr. Whiting appears in the exhibition itself. But we mustn't forget our friends in the oil fields. And I spoke already of Mr. John Mather, whose remarkable achievement of chronicling the entire development of the early oil industry in the Oil Creek area and further afield. There's great stories attached to him that I don't have time to tell, how he saved a significant portion of his lifetime's work from a burning building during the 1892 Titusville fire. And all those photographs are in the wondrous collection at Drake Well, as many of you will know. But others cashed in on it. These are probably reprinted and quite possibly originally Mather photos. But notice, in the early years, he always tells us who the wells belong to, or the name of the wells, and which oil farm they're on, or which Benioff Run is a tributary of Oil Creek. And here, of course, we couldn't leave on this august occasion without mentioning Pithole City, which, as many of you know, lasted 500 days and from around 1865, 1866. And in that time, the sudden oil boom in that area, they managed to build not only a 1,200-seater opera house, I understand, but also these two rather fine churches that I'm very fond of. And of course, while the better class of people were at Sunday morning service, some of their workers were at the bar at the United States Hotel in Petroleum Center. I think it was Petroleum Center that had the unfortunate moniker of the wickedest place in all the world. But again, Drakewell will correct me if I'm assigning the moniker to to the wrong location in the oil regions. But again, just all human life is there. It's not just pictures of oil wells. We also get numerous views, and there's a number of them in the exhibition. A number of rare Mather views. John Mather loved to take photographs of oil company officials lounging outside their offices in the oil fields. So we've got one or two of those. So that's pretty well where we are. I've overrun my time and tried your patience, but I hope you've got a sense, if you've not been familiar with stereo views before, of just the scale and the range of the resources that are available. But they're not always the easiest things to work with. Like a number of collectors and others, I've spent many years poring over these. And there are a few things that I think we need for the future, and I'll finish on this. That we need, I think, a wider recognition in the heritage community that stereo views have a great deal to offer. We also need to think about preservation, because many of them are fading fast. We also need to make sure we wear gloves and possibly a mask, because recent research has shown that many of them, unfortunately, have traces of heavy metals in the mounts, which is not what one wanted to hear, and may explain why I've lost all my hair. But the preservation of these images, even if the originals are fading, is hugely important, because many of them are the only surviving record of particular places at particular times. And I've been saying this for a number of years, and interestingly, exactly the same thing was recently said by the chief curator of the Sir Brian May archive of stereoscopy, which is now based in London, is now, I think, arguably the largest collection in the world. So they are very, very important in terms of our historical heritage and geographical heritage. So they're very widely scattered. They were not really systematically collected by most museums. The work was left to private collectors. Fortunately, some of those have now left quite large deposits at places like the New York Public Library. The Library of Congress is certainly onto it. There are up to 55,000 views available online now. But we also need more work to link the original industrial concerns to the stereo views of their companies, mines, furnaces, and what have you. Because there's a great deal to discover there, more than we might, I think, ever imagine. So I hope Bodhi's laid on some refreshments in Scranton for you. I hope you enjoy the exhibition and have opportunity to visit more than one site. And we very much welcome your comments. We had some wonderful comments at the London exhibition, and I'm sure you will outdo them at least tenfold. So thank you very much for your attention, for tuning in or coming into Scranton, and I hope that has been of some interest. Sorry to overrun my time a bit.
Well, that's great, Richard. Thank you very much. It was a fantastic presentation, a great overview on Pennsylvania industry, and then the approach of the stereo view photographers to document it. We have some time for questions if anybody has them. You can enter them in the chat or the Q&A section on Zoom, or if you're in Scranton, you could let Chris or I know and we could pass them on. In the meantime, I guess I can officially open the exhibit. So we're thrilled to open uh, Seeing Double, Pennsylvania's Industrial Revolution in 3D at the Anthracite Heritage Museum in Scranton, the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania in Stroudsburg. The Cornwall Iron Furnace is in Cornwall, and Drake Well in I guess in Titusville. So make sure the exhibits will be open all summer. We've got the glasses here to see the work that Richard had done in creating the stereo views in the anaglyph form. And if you can't make it, like Richard said, come out to all the sites and see them over the summer. You should have time. Well, we can hang out a bit, but anyway, thank you all for attending today or tuning in, and we hope to see you all soon. Like I said, Richard and I can hang around for a few minutes if anything comes up. Do you see the comments, Richard?
Yeah, I'm just looking at the
Okay.
webinar chat at the moment. My apologies for there was a moment where the internet became unstable, but hopefully that didn't disrupt the presentation too much.
I'm wondering if Bob Walensky is asking when you will venture back to PA.
That's uh, I've got a lot of uh, things to try and tidy up and clear up some research I'm doing at the moment. So uh, plans don't extend much beyond the summer, but I hope to put in an appearance and say hello on the heritage tour that you're bringing over in the summer.
And Pat Morrison, who you may know, is now the site administrator at the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania.
All right.
He might have been an educator when you were researching there.
Yeah. Oh, right. Yes.
Let me pop into the auditorium real quick.
Are there any comments from the floor in Scranton? Oh, hang on. Uh,
Oh.
Chris has mentioned something in the Q&A. I thought they came into the chat, but I haven't seen it.
Oh.
I'm not seeing it at the moment. Ah, right. That's a good
Chris,
question.
Chris, I just
Um,
gave you the ability to talk.
yes, about the exhibition catalogue. Sorry, it took a minute to come up. Um, uh, a catalogue was produced after the 2023 London exhibition. We have been talking about the possibility of uh, making some copies available in the United States. One of the slight difficulties is the cost of shipping them. But eventually, but it may be some time, it may be into 2027, that the plan is that it will, by one means or another, be made available on an open access basis. But that won't be that online, that is, but that won't be until sometime after the completion of the uh, actual physical exhibition, if you understand me. I hope that answers the question. Are you still there, Bodie?
Oh, I am. Yes.
Yeah. So did Chris hear that answer?
Yes, he replied with a thank you.
Oh, yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
thank you.
Okay, yeah, that's good. Got it. It's come up now. It a little bit of a lag before I'm seeing
Mm.
seeing the messages. Oh, and I should say I'm also uh, at the same time, roughly as the catalogue goes online, but I say that's probably going to be 2027. Um, I will aim, if I can, to make copies of the digital anaglyphs available as an online permanent exhibit. But obviously time has been taken up getting ready for the physical exhibit. And again, that will be some time before that happens. So don't hold your breath on that one. There's some technical matters to resolve before I can do that. But I'll certainly uh, let you know uh, uh, as soon as that happens. So that's separate because the exhibition catalogue does not contain anaglyphs. It just contains mono versions of the images that we use to make the anaglyphs, if you see what I mean. Um, because if you provide anaglyphs, you've got to provide equipment to view them, and then you've got to do special binding, and that's why that wasn't done at the time.
Well, thank you again, Richard. Like I said, this was a great program. Really informative. We have recorded it and we will make it available on our website. Oh, did have another comment. Let's see. Oh, Pat Morrison says we've got a lot of positive reviews on the displays already. Folks are definitely engaged with the glasses as well.
All right.
So if anybody out there has questions or wants to follow up with Richard or any of us, you can shoot me or any of the site administrators an email, and we will get that to Richard. And I want to thank again all of my colleagues at the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania, Drake Well,
Mhm.
Cornwall Iron Furnaces, and the staff at the Anthracite Museum for working with Richard to pull this all
Mhm.
together.
And okay, I just one final point. If there are slightly more technical questions that come up after people have had chance to digest the exhibition, I'd be happy for them to be forwarded to me, and I'll try and respond in a bit more detail than is possible in a kind of webinar chat.
Well, very good.
Thank
Well,
you again for all your organisation and all the technology. And I'm glad we only had a minor blip in the middle.
yep, nope, no problem. Great, Richard. Thank you. And I hope everybody else has a great afternoon.
Okay, thank you. Best wishes to everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye bye. Right, I'll sign off now.
Okay, sounds good, Richard. Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll talk soon.
Yeah, super. Thank you very much indeed.